Hello and welcome to Historical Highlights. Today we're going to be answering the question, was A. Philip Randolph GOATED? While everyone has heard of key figures of the civil rights movement in America, such as Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, fewer people are familiar with the work of A. Philip Randolph, who, along with several other figures, laid the groundwork for later progress in the African American civil rights campaign. The significance of Randolph comes from the foundations he created, which later civil rights leaders could build on in order to further African American civil rights. His early work may not have been as all-encompassing as the 1964 Civil Rights Act or the 1965 Voting Rights Act, but what he did achieve acted as stepping stones which the civil rights movement was able to use to progress even further in securing African American civil rights. And Randolph still worked as a key organizational figure even into the 1960s, although he was not as influential as other more prominent leaders. Now, let's start with his early life. He was born in 1889 in Crescent City, Florida, to a tailor and minister in an African Methodist Episcopal Church, James William Randolph, and a seamstress, Elizabeth Robinson Randolph. He and his family moved to Jacksonville, Florida in 1891, where he attended the Cookman Institute, which happened to be the only academic high school in Florida for African Americans, where he excelled in both literature and drama, as well as public speaking. His brilliance was already showing at this young age, with him graduating as valedictorian of the 1907 class. From his childhood, he learnt two things: the importance of a person's character and of education. Having grown up in the South, he had of course been exposed to all the horrors that the Jim Crow states had to offer, and Randolph was understandably pissed off with not being able to pursue anything other than manual labor in the South on account of the massive discrimination faced by African Americans in essentially every aspect of their lives. So, he set his sights north and moved to New York City in 1911, where he could fully realize his ambitions. Although, at this time, Randolph's ambition was to become an actor. Back in the South, he had dedicated much of his time to singing and acting, and in New York, he organized the Shakespearean Society in Harlem, playing roles like Romeo and Hamlet. However, after failing to win his parents' approval, he promptly gave up on this dream and decided to switch up his career. Alright, now on to his early career. It was in New York that Randolph first became exposed to the socialist ideology that went on to inspire his distinctive civil rights activism that focused on collective action as a way for black people to gain legal and economic equality. Here, he met Columbia University law student Chandler Owen. The two developed Marxist economics and became interested in Lester Frank Ward's sociological ideas, which argued that people could only be free if they weren't subject to economic deprivation. Having met and become good friends discussing socialism, the two of them opened an employment office in Harlem together, which provided job training for Southern migrants and encouraged them to join trade unions. Then, in 1917, they founded The Messenger with help from the Socialist Party of America, a magazine for African Americans by African Americans, which promoted socialism, campaigned against lynching, and opposed U.S. participation in World War I. The Department of Justice called The Messenger, quote, the most able and the most dangerous of all the Negro publications. This goes to show the real impact this magazine had in starting to empower African Americans to fight for greater civil and economic rights, especially for it to be considered an outright threat by the Department of Justice. One critic even called it one of the most brilliantly edited magazines in the history of Negro journalism. A backhanded compliment for sure, but it still highlights the Messenger's success. However, disagreements among the editors soon resulted in a shortfall of financial support that ultimately caused the Messenger to decline. Now, let's move on to his later career. Randolph's work as a union organizer is what brought him to prominence. He became the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1925. This was the first successful black-led trade union protecting the rights of porters on trains. These workers were treated and paid poorly, and were called by the name of the founder of the railroad company they worked for, rather than their own names. Having enrolled the majority of porters, he fought a bitter battle against the Pullman Company. After 10 years of fighting, he managed to achieve over $2 million in wage increases for the porters, a shorter work week, and overtime pay. In 1941, he along with Bayard Rustin and A.J. Must planned a march in Washington, partially inspired by Gandhi's success in using peaceful, direct action against the British Empire in India. They were protesting against the racial discrimination in war industries, demanding an end to segregation in the armed forces, improved access to defense employment, and a federal anti-lynching law. Randolph claimed to be able to bring 50,000 workers on the march. President Roosevelt, worried about the impact this would have on the war effort, desegregated war industries by setting up the Fair Employment Practices Commission through Executive Order 8802. This happened before the march even took place, so it was cancelled altogether. Despite them not achieving all of their aims, and Randolph feeling disappointed that he did not go far enough and that he should have demanded the desegregation of all industries, not just war industries, the Fair Employment Act was still a major victory in the early civil rights campaign, and no doubt an important stepping stone for later movement success. Randolph continued to campaign. In 1942, drawing a crowd of 18,000 people to a rally in Madison Square Gardens, New York, he was able to secure government support for strikes for equal rights for black workers. Then, in 1947, Randolph and colleague Grant Reynolds renewed efforts to end discrimination in the armed forces, forming the League for Nonviolent Civil Disobedience, formerly the Committee Against Jim Crow in Military Service. Randolph urged young black men to resist Truman's proposed peacetime draft law. Truman was in a vulnerable electoral position in 1948, and he needed the support of the growing black population in the northern states, leading him to eventually give in, issuing Executive Order 9981, which began the process of desegregating the armed forces. Moreover, in 1950, along with Roy Wilkins, the executive secretary of the NAACP, and Arnold Aronson, a leader of the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, he founded the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, or the LCCR, which has been, and still is to this day, a major civil rights coalition which has coordinated a national legislative campaign on behalf of every major civil rights law since 1957. Whilst some people criticized Randolph for his socialist ideology and for not being a member of the church unlike other civil rights leaders, he continued to be a key organizational figure, even supporting Martin Luther King in the 1960s and organizing the March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. I think what makes Randolph stand out as one of the GOATs of civil rights is how much he managed to achieve in the years 1900 to 1945 when compared to other civil rights leaders and organizations of the time. For example, another civil rights leader in this period was Marcus Garvey, who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA. His main belief was that the best thing for African Americans was to return to Africa. Though he did set up the first Black Power group and was popular among African Americans, much more so than Randolph, economic problems and post-war rioting undermined much of his progress. Furthermore, he favored big ventures rather than addressing the immediate concerns of African Americans. This is the crucial difference that sets these two apart. Randolph was clearly the more pragmatic figure, who actually made real improvements to some African Americans' lives, whereas Garvey failed to really achieve anything tangible and ended up being seen as more of a conman towards the end of his career, and after meeting with the leader of the KKK in 1922, he lost his previously strong support from the black community. Additionally, one of the powerhouse organizations of the civil rights movement was the NAACP. However, they failed to really achieve that much in this period, bar the lobbying against Hoover's appointment of John J. Parker to the Supreme Court, which ended up being successful. This was by far their most significant achievement in this period. Moreover, the organization was not popular with African Americans, since the majority of the leadership was composed of whites, and the view held by most African Americans of the NAACP feels similar to the view held by most Native Americans of the organization Friends of the Indians. Now, to be fair, Randolph was also not the most popular figure among black Americans, what with him being a socialist and everything, but his achievements speak for themselves, and he definitely laid greater foundations for the later civil rights movement in this period than the NAACP did. All things considered, I think it's fair to say that A. Philip Randolph was most definitely one of the GOATs of the civil rights campaign. From his early work at the Messenger up to his role in the 1963 March on Washington, he had a long and successful career in securing civil rights for African Americans. Even though he didn't play a central role in the major successes of the 1960s, in the decades leading up to that point, he successfully paved the way for that later success, with his relentless campaigning for civil and economic rights. He certainly did more than anyone else from 1900 to 1945 to further the civil rights movement. For these reasons, I believe it's safe to put Randolph firmly up there with the other GOATs of the civil rights movement. If you did manage to make it through that, thank you so much for watching, and if you did end up enjoying it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. And if you did enjoy this video, I'll probably be making some videos about some history that I find interesting in the future, so do be sure to check those out. And just thanks again for watching this video.